It begins with silence, a silence so unnatural. It feels as though the world itself is holding its breath. Deep within the cold, desolate farmlands of Bavaria, in late March of 1922, there stood a lonely homestead Hinterkaifeck, surrounded by forests that whispered secrets no one wanted to hear, and fields that stretched endlessly beneath the grey German sky. To most, it was just another small farm tucked away from civilization. But what happened there would become one of the most horrifying and unsolved crimes in European history. This is the story of the Hinterkaifeck Murders, and it begins with footsteps in the snow. 6 months before the killings, the farm's owner, Andreas Gruber-Stern, aging man known in the village for his temper, and suspicion started to notice strange things happening around his property. One night, after a heavy snowfall, he saw footprints leading from the dense woods straight to his farmhouse. But there were no prints going back. Whoever had come from the forest had never left. He searched the barn, the stalls, the attic. Nothing. His wife, Cecilia, told him he was imagining things. But Andreas wasn't a man given to imagination. Days later, a key to the house went missing. Then, a newspaper appeared on the kitchen table, one from Munich, a city nearly 70 kilometers away. No one on the farm subscribed to that paper. No one from the family had gone to Munich. At night, strange creaking sounds echoed from the attic. The family's maid, terrified by what she heard, packed her things and left, claiming the house was haunted. Andreas laughed at her fear, but after she left, even he began locking the doors tighter. And yet, something was watching them. By March 1922, the Gruber family lived in an easy silence. Andreas, his wife Cecilia, their widowed daughter Victoria Gabriel, and Victoria's two children, 7-year-old Cecilia and 2-year-old Joseph. They had also recently hired a new maid, Maria Baumgartner, who had arrived only hours before the murders. The last days of March brought bitter cold. On the 31st, snow covered the farmlands in a dull white haze. No one knows exactly how that day began. What we do know is how it ended. Neighbors would later say that they saw smoke rising from the chimney at Hinterkaifeck the next morning, and assumed all was well. But for the next several days, the family was unseen. Mail piled up. Victoria missed choir practice. Young Cecilia didn't appear at school, and the postman noticed that the farm, usually noisy with animals, had grown eerily still. By April 4th, suspicion had settled over the village. Several neighbors gathered their courage and decided to check on the Grubers. When they arrived, the air smelled faintly of smoke and blood. The barn doors were closed, but something inside was wrong. They pushed them open slowly, and what they saw would haunt them forever. Lying beneath piles of hay, in the dim light of the barn, were 4 bodies. Andreas, Cecilia, Victoria, and little Cecilia, the granddaughter. Each had been brutally murdered with a matica heavy farming tool used for breaking soil. Their skulls were shattered, their faces almost unrecognizable. Inside the farmhouse, the horror continued. The maid, Maria, was found murdered in her bed, and little Joseph, just 2 years old, was discovered in his cot, killed where he slept. 6 lives slaughtered, no witnesses, no clear motive. But the strangest thing of all, whoever had done it had stayed. Neighbors reported that the chimney had continued to smoke 4 days after the murders. The cows had been milked, the animals fed. Someone had eaten meals in the kitchen. Someone had remained at Hinterkaifeck, calmly living among the corpses. Police were called from Munich. They arrived to find one of the most bizarre and perplexing crime scenes in European history. There were no signs of forced entry. The attack seemed to have begun in the barn where, one by one, the victims were lured and killed. First Andreas, then his wife, then Victoria, and finally little Cecilia, who horrifyingly seemed to have lived several hours after her attack, tearing out clumps of her own hair in terror before dying beside her mother. It was as though the killer knew them, as though the killer had waited for the perfect moment. The investigators examined the house. They found coins, jewelry, and money untouched. So it wasn't robbery. There was no evidence of sexual assault. There were no strange footprints, except the ones leading in from the woods, just as Andreas had noticed months earlier. And then came another discovery. In the barn loft, hidden in the hay, were strange indentations, places where someone had clearly been sleeping. Someone had been living in their attic. As the officers stood in that creaking, silent house, they realized that for months, someone had probably been watching the Gruber family from above, listening to them sleep, studying their lives, waiting for the moment to strike. And yet, even with that horrifying possibility, no suspect was immediately identified. The village of Kaifeck was thrown into chaos. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some said it was a vagrant, a wandering madman. Others whispered that it was a family member, and a few believed it was punishment from God. But for those who knew Andreas Gruber, suspicion had many directions. He was not a well-liked man. Locals spoke of his cruelty, his temper, and his dark secrets. Some whispered that he had a deeply inappropriate relationship with his own daughter, Victoria. The town had even charged them with incest years earlier, though Andreas served only a short jail sentence. And so began one of the most twisted investigations in German criminal history. The police questioned everyone: neighbors, workers, priests, even the victims' relatives. They dissected every rumor, every possibility. But the more they investigated, the stranger it became. One man, a neighbor named Lorenz Schlittenbauer, quickly drew attention. He had once been romantically involved with Victoria. In fact, some claimed he believed he was the father of little Joseph, the youngest victim. But when Victoria broke off their relationship, things had grown tense between them. When the murders were discovered, Lorenz was among the first to enter the barn. He helped uncover the bodies. But his behavior that day unsettled others. He was calm, almost too calm, as though he knew what he was going to find. He moved through the house with familiarity, even unlocking doors that no one else could. When questioned, he claimed that Victoria had given him keys in the past. Whispers spread through Kaifeck that maybe, just maybe, Lorenz had returned to the farm that night. In anger or heartbreak, maybe the confrontation had spiraled out of control. But there was no proof and no confession. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Investigators gathered every clue they could. They even decapitated the victims, sending their heads to Munich for analysis, hoping to find signs of the murder weapon. But even the experts could not solve it, and during World War II, those heads were lost forever. All that remained were photos, police reports, and the silent ruins of a farm that had become cursed in the eyes of everyone who knew it. By the summer of 1922, the Hinterkaifeck farmhouse was demolished. But when the workers tore it down, they found something beneath the rubble, a hidden compartment under the floorboards. Inside were small personal items belonging to the family, untouched, as though placed there by unseen hands. Whoever the killer was, they had left behind not just death, but mystery. The village would never forget it. Even generations later, locals would say that when the wind passed through those empty fields at night, you could still hear the sound of footsteps leading from the woods to where the farmhouse once stood. And still, no one has ever walked back. Days after the discovery, Bavaria was paralyzed with fear. The Hinterkaifeck murders weren't just a tragedy, they were an invasion of the most sacred space imaginable, the home. The sense that someone could have lived among the family for weeks, watching, listening, waiting, sent shivers across every small town and village in the region. The Munich police began piecing together what little they had. Every footprint, every rumor, every neighbor's recollection. But the more they learned, the darker the story became. Andreas Gruber had been known as a man of secrecy and cruelty. Neighbors described him as harsh, distrustful, and at times violent. His daughter, Victoria, was one of the few people in the village people truly pitied. She was widowed. Young her husband, Carl Gabriel, had supposedly died in the First World War, but strange stories persisted. Some villagers whispered that they'd seen a man resembling Karl after the war, that maybe he hadn't died at all. Maybe he'd returned, bitter and broken, only to find his wife living once again with her father, the same father accused of having an incestuous relationship with her. It was the kind of rumor small towns hold onto tightly, like a secret poison passed from one generation to the next. But if Karl was alive, could he have been the one hiding in the attic? Could he have been the man Andreas saw the footprints of months before the murders? Police searched military records, tracking every rumor of a soldier matching his description. But the trail led nowhere. Karl Gabriel had, by all official accounts, died on the front lines. There were witnesses, his body had been buried. Yet the thought lingered, whispered behind closed doors, what if he had returned home? Just not as the man he once was. But that was only one theory. Another centered on Lawrence Schlittenbauer, the neighbor who'd been first on the scene. Investigators noted his oddly composed demeanor, the way he handled the bodies, his ability to unlock the doors. He claimed he'd once been engaged to Victoria, and when her father forbade their marriage, bitterness had festered between them. Lawrence told police that Victoria had come to him begging for financial help before her death, that she wanted to leave Hinterkaifeck and start over somewhere else. But then, she changed her mind. No one knows why. Maybe her father refused. Maybe there was a fight. When Lawrence was brought in for questioning, he denied everything. He insisted he loved Victoria, that he'd never harm her or the children. Still, the investigators found it hard to ignore one detail. When he'd entered the farmhouse with the search party, he reportedly remarked that little Joseph was his boy. Was that grief or guilt speaking? It wasn't the only strange thing. Days before the discovery, villagers passing by had noticed smoke from the chimney. But after the bodies were found, they realized something else. The family dog had been tied up, alive but aggressive, as though it had been guarding the home. And inside, someone had been eating bread, cold cuts, milk. Someone had been comfortably living in the house, surrounded by corpses. The idea made even the police sick. Whoever had done this wasn't just a murderer, they were a monster capable of staying, calmly inhabiting the silence they had created. Weeks turned into months, and the investigation expanded across Germany. Police questioned traveling workers, soldiers, former farmhands, and even vagrants passing through. Hundreds of people were interrogated, but each lead went nowhere. Then, a curious piece of evidence emerged. A local mechanic came forward, claiming that a man he didn't recognize had approached him days before the murder, asking about how to repair a broken engine part. The man had mentioned staying at a farm a few kilometers from Kaifeck. The mechanic didn't think much of it at the time until the news of the murder spread. When shown photos of the Grubers, he said he didn't recognize any of them. Whoever that stranger was, he vanished before police could find him. It was enough to convince investigators that maybe the killer wasn't from Kaifeck at all. Maybe he was a drifter, a stranger who stumbled upon the isolated farm and saw an opportunity. But even that theory fell apart under scrutiny. The killings had been too personal, too deliberate, too precise. The order of the murders suggested familiarity, luring each victim into the barn, one by one, as if they trusted the person calling them. The strikes were brutal but controlled. Whoever wielded that mattock knew how to kill efficiently. And then there were the psychological details, the killer feeding the animals, maintaining the home. These were acts of someone not panicking, not fleeing, but staying in control. It was almost as though whoever committed these murders felt at home. Months later, new rumors began to surface. A former maid of the Grubers, one who had quit months before the new maid was hired, came forward again. She told investigators that she had heard footsteps in the attic at night, doors opening and closing, voices whispering in the dark. She had begged Andreas Gruber to investigate, but he had laughed at her. Her testimony reignited the theory that someone had been living above the family, watching them for weeks or even months before killing them. But who? When police examined the remains of the house more closely, they found faint signs that someone might have built a small, hidden sleeping area above the barn. Straw bedding, crumbs of food, a discarded handkerchief. It wasn't conclusive evidence, but it was enough to feed the legend the image of a phantom stranger lurking overhead, while the Grubers went about their lives below. The press feasted on the story. Newspapers across Germany ran headlines, calling Hinterkaifeck the House of Death. Some papers invented details to sell copies claiming the killer had written messages in blood or carved symbols into the walls. None of it was true, but the hysteria only deepened. Eventually, police formed their own list of suspects, nearly 100 of them. Each name carried its own possible motive: money, revenge, jealousy, insanity. But every theory crumbled under the weight of the evidence, or lack of it. And then the case took a darker turn. In 1923, a full year after the murders, a farmer from a nearby town claimed that his farm had been broken into. Food was stolen. Footprints led from his property into the forest toward the direction of Hinterkaifeck. He swore he'd seen a figure watching from the trees at night. When the police investigated, they found nothing. No man, no footprints. Just the stillness of the forest and the faint echo of something that refused to die. It was as if Hinterkaifeck had become cursed ground. Even after the farmhouse was torn down, people avoided the site. Children were warned never to play near it. Travelers said they saw lights in the woods or heard muffled cries drifting on the wind. And every year, as March turned to April, some locals swore they could still smell smoke rising from a chimney that no longer existed. But behind the folklore, the investigation continued. In 1925, a new police commissioner reopened the case, hoping fresh eyes might reveal something overlooked. He re-examined Lorenz Schlittenbauer, interviewed new witnesses, and even retested what little physical evidence remained. But again, nothing definitive. Still, there were inconsistencies. Lorenz had changed parts of his story. He couldn't recall where he was the night of the murders. Some said he had quarreled with Andreas days before. Others said he'd confessed to friends in drunken conversations. But when confronted, he laughed it off as gossip, and perhaps that's all it was, gossip, because when he died years later, he took his secrets, if any, to the grave. Yet, as the decades passed, new suspects continued to emerge. In the 1940s, a soldier returning from the war confessed on his deathbed that his brother had done something terrible in Bavaria years ago, a family annihilation on a farm. The details sounded eerily similar to Hinterkaifeck. But when investigators tried to follow up, the man's brother was already dead. Each theory raised hope, each one ended in silence, and through it all, the photographs of the crime scene, black and white, hauntingly still remained as chilling reminders of what had happened there. The bodies under the hay, the broken faces, the lonely house surrounded by endless emptiness. Hinterkaifeck had become more than a murder mystery. It was a reflection of something deeper: human isolation, fear, and the unknown darkness that can live quietly right next to us. To this day, historians debate what really happened that night in 1922. Was it revenge, madness, or something far stranger, something that never should have been explained? Nearly a century has passed since that cold spring night, and yet the Hinterkaifeck murders still defy logic. The crime remains unsolved, not because investigators didn't try, but because every new lead seemed to twist back into the fog of something unknowable. By the 1950s, new generations of German detectives revisited the case. Post-war forensic experts re-examined the old files, desperately searching for patterns that earlier investigators may have missed. They pored over every surviving photograph, every handwritten statement, every trace of the lives cut short. But time had devoured most of the physical evidence. The house was gone. The heads once sent to Munich for a study had disappeared in the chaos of war. There was nothing left to test, nothing to hold. Only paper and memory. Still, they found things. Subtle inconsistencies buried deep in the old reports. For one, there was no clear timeline. The murders had likely happened on the night of March 31st, but the discovery wasn't made until April 4th. In those 4 days, neighbors had seen smoke rising, smelled cooked food, and noticed that the animals had been tended to. Someone had been there, someone who felt comfortable enough to remain. But that raised an even darker question. How many nights did the killer sleep inside that house, surrounded by the dead? Did they sit at the family's table? Did they listen to the cows lowing in the barn, to the soft ticking of the clock, pretending it was all normal? Some investigators began to suspect that the killer had fled right away. Maybe they'd stayed for a reason. To hide, to plan, or to relive what they'd done. Psychologists who later analyzed the case agreed that whoever committed the murders likely had a deep connection to the family. A stranger wouldn't linger. A stranger wouldn't feed animals or eat leftovers. That level of control, of composure, pointed to someone whose rage wasn't impulsive, it was personal. And so the theory that gained the most traction was that Lawrence Schlittenbauer, neighbor, former lover, and rumored father of the youngest child, had killed them all in a fit of anger. But the evidence was circumstantial. He had an alibi no one could prove wrong. And when he died in 1941, whatever truth he carried went with him. Others argued that it couldn't have been him at all, that the killings were the work of a vagrant or a mentally disturbed veteran wandering through the countryside, one of many displaced by the Great War. Germany in 1922 was a country fractured by poverty, resentment, and despair. Men returned home from the trenches broken and forgotten, their minds scarred by what they'd seen. Some wandered, some killed, and a few, like the one who might have left footprints in the snow, hid in places they didn't belong. One of the more disturbing details came from a priest who knew the Grubers. He claimed that Victoria had come to him shortly before her death, desperate and afraid. She wanted to move away. She wanted to leave the farm behind. But her father wouldn't let her. The priest said she hinted that someone was watching the house, whether she meant a human presence or something else, he never knew. In the years that followed, countless amateur detectives obsessed over Hinterkaifeck. Letters poured into the police from across Germany. Each claimed to know the truth. Each promised a name. None led anywhere. One letter, though, still stands out. Written anonymously in 1926, it said only, "The man who lived in the attic has gone to sleep. But sometimes I still hear him walking." No return address, no signature. Decades later, in the 1970s, criminologists tried once more to solve the mystery using modern profiling techniques. They reconstructed the crime scene from photographs, measured strike patterns, and even recreated the sequence of the killings. Their conclusion was chilling. The murders had been carried out methodically, by someone calm and deliberate. The order of victims suggested strategy, not chaos. The killer likely began with Andreas and Cecilia in the barn, removing the strongest members of the household first before turning on Victoria and her daughter, then finally Maria and little Joseph inside. The report also noted something else. The killer had likely known that Victoria and her father shared a dark secret. It was possible, they said, that the murders were an act of punishment, a final reckoning. But punishment for what? Even among historians, there's no consensus. Some believe it was incest and shame. Others say it was greed, that Victoria was planning to withdraw her inheritance and leave her father. Others still claim it was jealousy, that Lawrence, rejected and enraged, decided that if he couldn't have Victoria, no one would. The truth is, we don't know, and perhaps we never will, because Hinterkaifeck isn't just a case. It's a story of human darkness buried beneath layers of fear, silence, and superstition. A place where the lines between the living and the dead seem to blur. When the farm was demolished, locals refused to take any of the wood or brick. They said it was cursed. The ground where it once stood was left empty for years, just a scar in the field. But eventually, a small memorial was erected, marking the spot where the Gruber family met their end. Visitors who go there today say that the air feels different, thicker, colder. Some swear they hear faint sounds of footsteps in the grass, moving toward where the barn once stood. The footprints that led from the forest to the house in 1922 have never truly faded. Every so often, new theories surface online. True crime enthusiasts pore over digitized police reports, trying to spot something missed, a pattern in the footprints, a name mentioned twice, a small inconsistency in Lorenz's testimony. And yet, the deeper they dig, the stranger the case becomes. How could a killer live in the attic for weeks without being seen? Why would they stay afterward? Why leave money untouched? Why care for the animals? Why feed themselves? These are not the actions of a typical murderer. They're the actions of someone whose mind had crossed into something unrecognizable. Someone who didn't just kill out of rage, but out of obsession. What's even more haunting is the timeline leading up to that night. The missing keys, the newspaper no one bought, the attic noises, the footprints. It was as if the family had been living with their killer long before the murders began. Maybe he waited for the perfect night. Maybe he watched from above as they ate dinner, as they said their prayers, as the candlelight flickered across their faces. Maybe he waited until the fire burned low, until the sound of their voices disappeared one by one into sleep. And then he came down. The murders of Hinterkaifeck will likely remain one of the greatest unsolved crimes in history. Every decade brings new speculation, new names, new ghost stories whispered by locals. But what happened that night may never be truly known. The official files describe it clinically blunt force trauma, multiple victims, unknown perpetrator. But those who've studied the case know it's more than that. It's a portrait of human fear, the fear of being watched, of being hunted, of realizing too late that the danger has been inside your home all along. Today, if you travel to that part of Bavaria, you'll find nothing but open fields where the farmhouse once stood. A small cross marks the site. The grass moves gently in the wind, and the forest beyond remains quiet. But locals say that when the sun sets, shadows stretch across that ground in strange shapes, and sometimes, when the wind changes, you can almost hear it faintly, like a whisper carried through time. The creak of attic boards, the sound of hay shifting in the barn, and the crunch of footsteps in the snow, leading to a door that no longer exists, because at Hinterkaifeck, there was always someone watching. And though the farm is gone, the watcher remains. In the end, the Hinterkaifeck murders are more than an unsolved crime. They are a haunting reflection of how evil can hide in plain sight. Not in the shadows of strangers, but in the quiet corners of home, waiting, watching. The farmhouse may be gone, the killer lost to history, but the silence that lingers over those empty Bavarian fields still whispers of what happened there, of footsteps that led in and never came out. And maybe, just maybe, that silence reminds us that some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, they are meant to be remembered. If this story sent chills down your spine, make sure to like this video, subscribe for more true crime documentaries, and turn on notifications, because there are still countless dark stories buried in history, waiting to be unearthed.